Next up, we will hear from Joe Muskokomen. Joe Muskokomen is from Chippewa of the Thames First Nation near London, Ontario. He is a respected leader and advocate for Indigenous economic empowerment, bringing deep insight and lived experience to the conversation around wealth sovereignty. His work reflects a strong commitment to build self-determined, sustainable prosperity for Indigenous communities. Today, he joins us by video live and will share his perspective on wealth sovereignty. Please welcome Joe Muskokomen.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there, and this is the best we can do with the short notice that we've had. I'd like to discuss with you for a moment the idea of a First Nations sovereign wealth fund. At Chippewa, we've been dealing with how to create capital and how to inject capital into our business plans. And of course, as most of you know, that it's very difficult to raise capital within a First Nation, and that there are many hurdles and stumbling blocks that are there that need not be there. We have announcements such as loan guarantee programs, but they're insufficient. And I'll just go through some of the reasons why we don't believe that Aboriginal loan guarantee programs, both federally or provincially, are going to be adequate enough in order to engage First Nations in major projects. First of all, a loan guarantee program is actually the federal government or the provincial government, for that matter, really doesn't have any money on the table. All they're doing is guaranteeing to the banks that our loans won't fail. And if they do, all it's on the books right now is contingent liabilities. It's not even real money on the table. And so you have no way of growing it. You just have to borrow the traditional way, and you're subjected to a number of barriers and a number of hurdles that we've all come across over the years in trying to become engaged in major projects. And even when you look at the loan guarantee programs that have been announced and upgraded over the past number of months, you'll find that even they are insufficient to deal with major projects such as energy and infrastructure. And it doesn't necessarily mean to say that we can be investors in our own communities. So we've turned to the idea of a sovereign wealth fund over a year and a half ago and have been exploring and developing and looking at the governance structure in which we want it to be reactive. So the special sovereign wealth fund for First Nations would essentially have a collection of First Nations that would gather together and would put money, real money, on the table. As you know, there are millions of dollars of capital that are locked up by First Nations within trust account. And those trust account are really only there as a point in time when trusts were needed for very specific purposes, and they're very difficult to work with, very difficult to deal, and particularly if you have a diverse population that is spread out throughout not only the region but across Canada and indeed sometimes around the world. And you have to have a reform to those trust accounts, and it's very difficult to hit that margin of a voting public in order to have a reform to the existing trusts. We think it's important that in order to grow capital and then grow your own sovereignty, you need to have a mechanism, a funding mechanism that is responsive to the needs of the community at that given time. trust accounts are locked up in a time capsule, and they need to be opened, and they need to be put into areas where special purpose vehicles can be designed and developed to deal with very specific types of projects, and that they would be controlled by the First Nations themselves. They wouldn't be controlled by the banks. They wouldn't be controlled by bureaucratic policymakers. They would actually have the governance structure that would be designed and developed that would be responsive to the First Nations that are actually going to be borrowing the money internally to themselves and loaning the money internal to each other, so that we can cross different sectors, so that we can be investors in different areas along the supply chain, and not just harness to regional kinds of development that take place within a given regional area or treaty area. There's no reason why First Nations can't be trading amongst themselves from coast to coast to coast and being involved in all kinds of different projects that are within our treaty territories or within our Aboriginal rights territories. And so it opens it up in a different way, that we're actually attracting money, foreign money for that matter, from the outside in. We're able to then attract money from other capital ventures that are locked up in pension plans, let's say, or in unions or in private equity funds. We should have a whole host of opportunities available to us and not be saddled into one or two very narrow kinds of funding arrangements that are established by the federal government, in which in fact doesn't have the sufficient amount of capital to even become involved in, let's say, the nuclear business or pipeline business or other major projects that are going to take tens of billions of dollars to invest in. We should be looking at what's available at the opportunity now, and looking towards how in fact we harness our sovereign wealth internally, along with being able to have governmental funding supplement that, where in fact we'll make money for the government rather than just making money for banks. We've seen what locked up money does. It doesn't penetrate very deep or very far into the First Nations, and it certainly hasn't been able to move forward on major projects that are going to cost in the hundreds, tens of billions of dollars to get up and running. Here in Ontario, as an example, there's going to be a need for 100% more hydroelectric power within the next 20 years. And that's going to take a tremendous amount of capital in order to do that. Yes, we have some ways of doing it now at a smaller scale, but when we get into nuclear design and nuclear development and placement, then you're looking at a whole different kind of business plan and balance sheet to accompany that. And oftentimes, as we all know, First Nations in themselves do not have the adequate balance sheet to be able to go up and take a fairly major equity position within any one of those kind of major project areas. So we think that the loan guarantee program, while it may be useful for some, and I'm not discounting it at 100%, it may be useful for some. In many ways, it's obsolete. It's too time consuming. It's too bogged down in bureaucratic process, and it's not responsive to the economy. And that's what we're trying to do, is be responsive to the economy. While in fact, the Sovereign Wealth Fund has a larger scale, a broader audience, more governance towards First Nations, a bigger need for capacity development in having our own institutions and working through our own jurisdictions. And so I call upon Canada on the announcement of their $25 billion sovereign wealth fund. We are your treaty partners. We're not the stakeholders. We are the rights holders. And if you take us seriously through UNDRIP, then you should be extending Canada. You should be extending to the First Nations of Canada 50% of that sovereign wealth fund so we become true partners in the economy and not be on the bleachers watching the game go on. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate all those comments that I've heard about NACA, and here's to another 30 years. Congratulations.